Good morning, everyone. We're continuing here in the laws of Kashrus, and we've begun the chapter of Bishul Akum, food that is cooked by a non-Jew. And he writes, Tali b'minhag HaMakor. Everything that we discussed yesterday, the two stipulations of the prohibition of Bishul Akum, which is, number one, if the food is eaten raw, even if it's cooked, it's not a problem. If the food is normally eaten raw, and it could be eaten raw, so therefore the cooking that the goy does doesn't really benefit the Jew so much, therefore there's no prohibition over there. And number two, he said that it has to be a choshev, some kind of royal type of food, that it would end up on the shulchan melachim, would end up on the king's table. I guess that we would say today that it would end up at the presidential banquet, or at a banquet for a chasen or a wedding, something that is considered to be good enough that it's going to end up on a luxury type of a table or a meal. So he says like this: it's all based upon the minhag, the custom of the place. Something that is normally eaten raw, that the Chazal said that even if a goy would cook it, you're still allowed to eat it. It's all dependent upon the minhag, the custom of the people. If the majority of people only eat that particular kind of food when it's cooked, even though that you have individuals that would eat it raw, but the individuals are considered to be secondary to the idea of the raiv of the majority. And therefore, even though normally they would be happy to eat this food raw, if a goy would end up cooking it, it's going to be considered bishul akum. Let's take, for example, and I think that this is how the halacha works out, the idea of fish. Fish normally for all generations was always eaten cooked. Everybody eats their fish cooked. Friday night you get filter fish, your salmon, your tilapia. You go to the restaurant, it's cooked. So therefore, if a goy would come along and they would cook fish, that would be considered to be bishul akum. However, we live in a world where there's something called sushi, which is raw fish. And many people will eat sushi, which is raw fish, and therefore, maybe if a goy would come along and cook fish, then it should be not a problem, because since fish normally is eaten raw, so therefore the cooking doesn't really do anything. However, the sushi is a minority of the fish that is in the world, meaning the majority of fish is going to be cooked. It's true that if a person eats sushi, they're going to eat raw fish. Nevertheless, since that the majority of fish that a person is going to consume is going to be cooked fish, even though that a person would eat sushi, which is raw fish, nevertheless, fish that would end up being cooked by a non-Jew would be a prohibition of bishul akum, of the food cooked by a goy. So to the opposite, if the majority of people eat this particular food raw, but you have an individual person, he only eats this food when it's going to be cooked. For example, everybody eats apples, raw apples. That's the way that it works. Majority of the world eats raw apples. You have certain people, they don't like it raw, they only like it cooked. He only eats boiled apples or roasted apples. So he only eats it cooked. But even though that he only eats it cooked, it doesn't really matter, because the world itself at large eats it raw. And therefore, even if a non-Jew would come along and cook the apple for him, he's still going to be allowed to eat it. If in one country or one state, one town, they always eat this food raw, and in another place they always eat it raw, and in another place they only eat it when it's cooked, you go according to the place. So if let's say in England, they only eat carrots that are cooked, so in England then, if a goy would end up cooking you a carrot, that's bishul akum. However, in America, people eat it both. They eat it raw, they eat it cooked, and many people eat raw carrots. So therefore, even if a non-Jew would come along and cook a carrot for you in America, you'd be allowed to eat it because there's no problem over there. That's in the world of the davar hanechel k'mo shu chai. Tomorrow, Be'ez Hashem, we will speak about what does it mean that it's Oil al Shulchan Malachim, food that has such a prominence to it. It would end up on the table of the Malachim, of the kings, which means it would end up at a meal that has chashivas, that has prominence to it. Have a wonderful day.